Everyone thought the real battle of the season would start later in the year. They were wrong. Because just after the Australian Grand Prix, Ferrari dropped a technical bombshell that could change the entire 2026 championship before it even settles. A rear wing so extreme, it does not simply open like a normal system. It rotates, almost flipping its aerodynamic profile when the car hits the straight. Engineers believe this design could unlock up to 10 km/h of extra top speed in the right conditions. In Formula One, that is not a small advantage. That is the difference between attacking or being untouchable. And the moment Ferrari revealed that the SF-26 would bring this Macarena rear wing upgrade to the Chinese Grand Prix, the reaction inside the paddock was immediate. Engineers started analyzing every frame. Teams began asking the FIA technical questions. And according to several insiders, Mercedes quickly realized something very uncomfortable. If Ferrari's system works the way the data suggests, the SF-26 might suddenly become the fastest car on every long straight in Formula One. But the detail that really shocked rival teams is connected to something that happened during the Australian Grand Prix, a moment almost nobody noticed. The Australian Grand Prix looked like a normal start to the season. The lights went out. The new generation of cars finally raced for the first time. And millions of fans were focused on the obvious stories. Lewis Hamilton driving his first race for Ferrari. New regulations changing the balance of power. And the first clues about which team might dominate the 2026 season. But inside the garages, the engineers were watching something completely different. They were watching the numbers. Speed traces. Energy deployment. Aerodynamic efficiency. Because in this new era of Formula One, small differences in efficiency can change everything. And during the race in Melbourne, Ferrari looked strong in many areas. The SF-26 launched aggressively from the start. The car had excellent traction coming out of slow corners. Through medium speed sections, it looked planted and stable. Both Ferrari drivers appeared confident. Charles Leclerc pushed hard. Lewis Hamilton looked calm, controlled, almost surprisingly comfortable in his new car. For most fans watching the race, Ferrari seemed immediately competitive. But the engineers studying the telemetry saw something else. Something small, but important. On the longest acceleration zones of the circuit, Ferrari was fast. Very fast. But not the fastest. Another team consistently reached slightly higher top speeds. Mercedes. Not by a massive margin. Not something obvious on the television broadcast. But enough to appear clearly in the data. And in Formula One, that kind of pattern makes engineers uncomfortable. Because a few extra kilometers per hour at the end of every straight can change the entire race dynamic. It changes overtaking opportunities. It changes defensive strategy. It changes how teams deploy electrical energy during a stint. Ferrari engineers understood the implication immediately. Their car had excellent corner performance, strong traction, solid race pace. But on tracks with very long straights, they still needed more efficiency, more speed, less aerodynamic drag. And that realization triggered a decision inside Maranello that surprised the entire paddock. Because Ferrari already had a radical solution waiting. A concept they had quietly tested months earlier during the Bahrain tests. A rear wing design so unusual that many rival engineers believed it would appear much later in the season. But after analyzing the data from Australia, Ferrari changed the plan. They accelerated development. They prepared multiple configurations of the system. And they decided to bring the Macarena rear wing to the Chinese Grand Prix. The moment that information began circulating through the paddock, attention shifted immediately. Because engineers from other teams understood something very quickly. If Ferrari's new rear wing worked exactly as their simulations suggested, the competitive balance of the 2026 season could begin changing much sooner than anyone expected. But the real shock came when rival engineers finally understood what Ferrari had actually built. At first, many teams thought the nickname was just paddock humor. The Macarena wing. It sounded exaggerated. Something journalists might invent to attract attention. But the moment technical images from testing began circulating inside the garages, the mood changed quickly. Because Ferrari had not simply modified the rear wing. They had reinvented how the entire system works. In traditional Formula One systems, the rear wing opens slightly when the drag reduction system activates. A small slot appears between the elements. Air flows differently. Drag decreases a little. Top speed increases slightly. It is effective, but controlled. Ferrari asked a very different question. What if the wing did not just open? What if it rotated? And that is exactly what they designed. Instead of a small movement, the main aerodynamic plane of the rear wing rotates dramatically when the car enters straight line mode. Not 10 degrees. Not 20. The movement is enormous. The wing can rotate between roughly 180 degrees and nearly 270 degrees. That means the aerodynamic profile of the wing almost flips upside down. In corners, the wing behaves like a normal high downforce component. The rear of the car stays planted, stable, predictable. But the moment the driver exits the corner and accelerates onto a straight, everything changes. The system activates. The wing rotates. Airflow reorganizes around the rear of the car. And the most important effect appears immediately. Drag almost disappears. Engineers inside the paddock started describing the two configurations in simple terms: corner mode and flight mode. Because when the wing rotates into its straight line position, it almost generates lift instead of downforce, dramatically reducing aerodynamic resistance. The result is exactly what Ferrari was chasing: speed. And a lot of it. Some early technical estimates suggest the concept could deliver between 8 and 10 km per hour more top speed compared with more conservative active wing systems. In Formula 1, that kind of advantage is massive. It can decide overtakes before drivers even reach the braking zone. It can allow a driver to attack while using less electrical energy. And it can completely transform race strategy. But the story becomes even more interesting when you look at what Ferrari prepared for China. Because they did not just build one version of the Macarena wing. According to reports circulating in the paddock, Ferrari produced 3 different specifications for the Chinese Grand Prix. One version designed for higher downforce and stability. Another optimized specifically for the aerodynamic balance required at Shanghai. And a third version, the most aggressive one. The configuration capable of using the full rotation range of the system. That means Ferrari could adapt the wing depending on track conditions, grip levels, wind direction, energy deployment strategy. And the moment rival teams realized Ferrari had this level of flexibility, the concern inside the paddock grew quickly. Because if the system works exactly as Ferrari expects, the SF-26 could suddenly become extremely powerful on circuits with long straights. Circuits like Shanghai. The Chinese Grand Prix is one of the most revealing tracks on the calendar when it comes to aerodynamic efficiency. The lap begins with long sweeping corners that demand stable downforce. But later comes one of the longest full throttle sections in Formula 1. The back straight. Drivers stay flat out for several seconds. And during those seconds, aerodynamic drag becomes the most important factor on the entire car. If Ferrari's Macarena wing truly enters flight mode on that straight, the SF-26 could suddenly gain several extra kilometers per hour compared with its rivals. That means later braking, more overtaking opportunities, and much greater pressure on the cars ahead. Which is exactly why Mercedes engineers started looking at the concept with growing concern. Because if Ferrari managed to combine strong corner performance with a massive straight-line advantage, the competitive balance of the season could shift very quickly. And that is the moment when the story stopped being just about engineering, and started becoming something much bigger inside the Formula 1 paddock. And this is the exact moment when the tension inside the paddock started rising. Because in Formula 1, when one team introduces a radical idea, the rest of the grid reacts in 2 very predictable ways. They try to copy it, or they try to stop it. When Mercedes engineers began studying Ferrari's Macarena rear wing in detail, they immediately realized something important. This was not a simple upgrade. It was a completely different aerodynamic philosophy. For years, Mercedes built its advantage on efficiency, strong power unit deployment, smart energy management, and extremely refined aerodynamic balance. In Australia, that formula was working. The Mercedes-powered cars showed impressive efficiency on the straights. Their energy deployment looked smooth, controlled, very optimized. But Ferrari's new concept threatened to attack that advantage directly. Because if Ferrari could remove drag more aggressively than anyone else, the advantage of a strong power unit suddenly becomes much smaller. Imagine a Mercedes leading a Ferrari out of the final corner. Normally, the Mercedes would defend the position down the straight. But if the Ferrari suddenly gains several extra kilometers per hour halfway down the straight, the situation changes completely. The Ferrari closes rapidly. The braking zone arrives. And the overtake becomes almost inevitable. That is exactly the scenario engineers inside the paddock started calculating. And those calculations made several teams uncomfortable. Because if Ferrari's advantage really reaches the predicted 8 to 10 km per hour window, it does not just affect one race. It affects many circuits on the calendar. Baku, Monza, Las Vegas, Spa. Any track with long straights suddenly becomes extremely favorable for Ferrari. But the concern inside Mercedes was not only about performance. It was also about the rules. Because when a system rotates through such a large angle, engineers immediately start asking deeper questions. How stable is the structure under load? Does the wing flex slightly at high speed? Could the aerodynamic behavior change during the transition between corner mode and straight mode? In Formula One, these questions are very serious, because the sport has a long history of innovations that sit right on the edge of legality. Flexible wings, moving floors, aerodynamic tricks that technically follow the rules, but stretch their interpretation. So the moment Ferrari's concept started spreading through the paddock, discussions with the FIA began quietly in the background. Not a protest, not an official complaint, but technical questions, requests for clarification, because teams wanted to understand how far Ferrari could push this concept. And that is why the Chinese Grand Prix suddenly became much more than just the second race of the season. Shanghai is one of the most revealing circuits for aerodynamic efficiency. The lap includes long sweeping corners that demand stability, but it also features one of the longest straights in Formula One. Drivers remain at full throttle for several seconds, and during that time, even the smallest drag advantage becomes obvious. If Ferrari's Macarena wing truly enters what engineers describe as flight mode on that straight, the SF-26 could suddenly look much faster than the cars around it. That means later braking, more overtaking, and much greater pressure on rivals like Mercedes. Which is why everyone in the paddock was watching Ferrari very closely as the Chinese Grand Prix approached. Because once the cars ran at full speed in Shanghai, the truth would finally be visible. Either the Macarena wing would prove to be just another clever innovation, or it would become the first real aerodynamic weapon of the 2026 season. And if it turns out to be the second option, the reaction from teams like Mercedes may only be the beginning.